Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Support life with every call and text when you switch your cell phone service. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special Christmas offer now through February 2nd.
Recently, the Vatican issued a document allegedly closing the door on women's ordination. By the Vatican, we mean a synod working group issued a document, and in that document, they claimed that they found no evidence in history of there being ordained women. That would be a true claim they made. They could not come up with a reason from history and from theology to ordain women. And it's been reported widely that the issue is closed, except if you actually read the document, it doesn't say that at all. What it says is that that it remains open for further study, and they're going to keep it open forever until they get what they want. The argument essentially seems to be they are reiterating in practice what the church has always said, but leaving the door open to a possible better argument being made until such a time as someone is able to formulate such an argument. And I'm reminded of when Pope Leo told a reporter fairly recently that attitudes towards that group of folks that James Martin has a weird interest in for a priest, that group he has dedicated himself to ministering to, not to call them to repentance and conversion into living life in our Lord, but rather offering them the sacraments while they continue to live depraved lifestyles. That group. Pope Leo said of that group that changing church teaching on that the people wouldn't be ready for it, so it's not the time. Basically is what he said. I'm reminded of that when looking at the reporting on and the statement from the Vatican on women's ordination. I'm not the only one who noticed this. Bishop Marian Eleganti is tackling one of the arguments head on about women's ordination. And the claim is that according to some of the women in the church, you have to be ordained or consecrated to be able to serve the church. That's a nonsensical argument, obviously. So we'll go to Bishop Marian Eleganti with his pretty short letter. It's not long enough to really be called a letter, but he posted this to his own website, and I will try to put a link to it later today at the Anthony Stine Substack, link in the description box of this video or podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to this. But the headline is, to serve, one does not need consecration. And here he gives you a summary of what was said by the synod statement. He says, quote, "The study commission on the question of the diaconate for women concludes, on the one hand, that the possibility of admitting women to the diaconate as part of the sacrament of holy orders must be ruled out, while at the same time it is not possible to, quote, make a definitive judgment on it, as in the case of priestly ordination. This, he says, is hardly convincing. It is all too obvious that despite the historical evidence, the aim is to keep the issue unresolved or to keep the question open." And he is precisely right, because that's exactly what the document says. The issue remains open for further study. This entire issue could be put to rest by Pope Leo invoking papal infallibility to reiterate the church's teaching, complete with an anathema. Let him be anathema, whoever disagrees with the statement. But no post-Vatican II pope has actually ever invoked an anathema before in a papal writing, so that would make him the first to do so. And if he did it, it would be a wonderful thing. But he won't. Now, Bishop Eleganti did everybody kind of he included an AI-generated image of a deaconette here. You'll see this image is an AI-generated fantasy image. Well, don't worry, even if that was a photograph of an actual woman in clericals with an alban, it would still be a fantasy image. It would just not be AI-generated. But here we go with his statement. "The church feminists who aspire to the priesthood and already wear fantasy stoles are nevertheless dissatisfied. Ever since John Paul II closed this can of worms forever with Ordinatio Sacerdotalis in 1994, attempts have been made to open it, although it has been claimed in many places that the historical models of the church's past cannot be normative for the church's practice in our time. The study commissions have thus far only re-examined history again and again, ultimately arriving at the same conclusions that have been available for decades. Tragedy or comedy? Probably both. The deaconesses of that time were something different from the deacons of their day, and were indeed culturally conditioned. Contrary to the assertions of Sister Linda Polk, she's one of the biggest proponents of women's ordination, who is presented as a papal advisor. The rejection of women's ordination, and consequently also of the diaconate for women, is not culturally conditioned, but rather infallible, timeless doctrine. The latter protects the deeper ecclesiological connections in this question, that is, the connection between Christ man and bridegroom and church woman bride, which are true and unchanging for all times and cultures. Even Pope Francis, who deliberately established the recent study commissions on this topic, acknowledged these connections. As an example, his references to the Marian and Petrine principles vis-a-vis Hans Urs von Balthasar. The commission, consisting of 5 men and 5 women, was therefore already aware in 2021 that the historical diaconate was not simply a female equivalent of the male diaconate. It apparently lacked a sacramental character. Even if history offers no basis for a sacramental diaconate for women, the question is nevertheless declared open for theological reasons. It must be clarified by the magisterium. Quoting it, however, this is likely to be a difficult undertaking given theological divergencies and a lack of consensus, comments Mario Trufanovich. As the reactions to the ordination of lay ministers in 1994, or in the document Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, have shown, the recourse to the ordination system recommended by the study commission is therefore a double-edged sword. The incorrigible remain incorrigible despite the official decision, meaning those advocating for it, for ordaining the ladies, remain so despite the official decision saying that you can't. Why did the study commission include this twist in its conclusion, despite the clear findings? To ensure that we enter the next round of this debate under different circumstances. This reminds me a bit of the fable of the hedgehog and the hare in the racetrack. It depicts a race made absurd by the hedgehog's trickery and ends with an exhausted hare. In the next milestone, a sui generis female diaconate, a deaconess without ordination, but with liturgical benediction. Perhaps such a quote-unquote deaconess will be permitted and seen as progress in synodal cooperation. When women and men, ordained and lay, ultimately, then, already now, do the same things in practice, the former by virtue of their ordination, the latter by virtue of blessings and special permissions, meaning baptism, preaching, and leading, then we have arrived at a sacramental dystopia. Some see this as the overcoming of clericalism, others as a new synodality, a new way of being together. Neither understood what a sacrament means. In Switzerland, we've had this for a long time. Call it what you will. Meaning, we've had nothing but sacramental confusion because of essentially women acting as if they have sacramental orders. Wow, well, Laura with the generous $100 Canadian super chat says, may God bless you, Anthony Stine, and your little family. Question, what does a sung mass with Latin mean? My hometown having first Latin mass, December 21st. If it is a traditional Latin mass, 1962 liturgical calendar or older, that's a high mass in the old type. Almost everything in the mass will be sung except for the announcements by the priest during the homily, his homily, and possibly the reading of the scriptures when he reads them in the vernacular at the beginning of the homily. That and a couple of other parts of the mass, but everything else will be sung in Gregorian chant. If you've been to a low mass, a low traditional mass, they take 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending if the priest is long-winded or slow with his prayers. And I say long-winded, meaning he loves to give a long homily, a 25-minute homily, something like that. Otherwise, they're about 40, 45 minutes, not terribly different in length than a mass in the ordinary form. A high mass is sung most of the time, most of the whole thing. It can go an hour and a half. I've been to a normal Sunday mass that was a high mass, a sung mass. That was a traditional mass that was 2 hours in length. So that's what it means. So for December 21st, that doesn't strike me as a major feast day or anything. So I don't think it should be extraordinarily extra long, but you should be prepared for an hour and a half of your time. Most of it's sung in Gregorian chant by the priest and the choir. Whether or not you sing with it really depends on sort of the culture of the parish, because Pius X, in an encyclical he wrote on liturgical music and participation in the Mass, wanted the laity to sing most of the parts of the Mass with the choir, like the Pater Noster, the Our Father, and a few other things. But some traditional parishes still ignore that, and it's which is always odd whenever I go to one, whenever I find myself at a mass like that. But that is generally how it is. But that's what it is. But yeah, thank you for the super chat. It's appreciated. Now on this, Bishop Eleganti is not wrong. He's got a bunch of sources here to back up what he's saying here about of how these people are acting. But he's not wrong when he says that the question remains open and has remained open no matter, like, if you read John Paul II's statement on it, it's as close to invoking papal infallibility as anybody has invoked from the throne of Peter since Vatican II. It's the closest to it, and I do wish he had, but I suspect even if he had, the movement for it would be persisting anyway, simply because the people we're talking about are revolutionaries. They don't believe in papal infallibility. They believe things in the church can change. They don't care that a tradition held by the church in practice for 200 years or longer is considered capital T tradition, not to be just discarded on a whim. They don't care. They don't care at all. So it probably would continue going. Papal infallibility was probably invoked, at least in part, by Pius IX when he formally defined it, to stop these revolutionaries. But that's the thing. The revolutionaries don't care because most of them don't actually have the faith. Now, speaking of not actually having the faith, a couple days ago, I reported to you here that Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez had a new documents from his sordid past were discovered, writing some rather nasty fiction, or in this case, nonfiction. He described some pretty impure stuff that he encountered as a priest, and in sordid detail, wrote tips for people on how to dress and how attractive bodies were, and the relaxing of certain organs, and describing the climactic part of the marital act as like a prayer moment. Also weird stuff, weird, impure stuff. And what I described to you as the tip of the iceberg wasn't even close to the worst of it. He got a lot of backlash from moderates and conservatives and traditionalists. And according to the German bishops, there's a conspiracy out there to take down Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. People are plotting and scheming from the shadows in a coordinated campaign to take him down. Only I wish that were true. I really do. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez should not be there. I do not deny that he is a very intelligent person. I disagree with everything he has to say, virtually, but I don't deny that he's intelligent. I think he's dangerous. He's a dangerous heretic, and he's a perverse heretic, and he shouldn't be anywhere near the levers of power in Rome. And yet he's a prefect for the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. So the German bishops have this rather hysterical report lamenting how we are so being mean to poor old Cardinal Fernandez. The headline translated from German is "Renewed Campaign Against Cardinal Over Alleged Erotic Works." This is already the third attempt to create a scandal against the prefect for the congregation, the doctrine of the faith, Cardinal Fernandez. An attempt to create scandal. An attempt? As a theologian and pastor, the current prefect of the congregation for the doctrine of the faith has frequently addressed the topic of matters of the flesh. Old publications have been used against him on several occasions, and this is happening again. Does the evidence presented this time constitute a genuine scandal? Yeah, it should. It only does not appear to be a genuine scandal because we are so numb to impurity. We swim in an ocean of impurity. You bring up people needing to dress modestly at Mass, and people roll their eyes and say it's not a big deal because, hey, they're pretty modestly dressed already by social standards. I've told some stories before. I remember going to daily Mass at an ordinary reformed parish. It was located right off the campus of my university. And I would sit there praying before Mass, and all of a sudden a woman in yoga pants got into the pew in front of me, kneeled, and started praying. And it was very annoying. We'll say this. And people act like that's fine. Oh, guard your eyes if it's a problem. Well, how about this? Yes, men, guard your eyes, and women for things that, you need to practice custody of the eyes for. But it does go both ways. You're not supposed to scandalize people and cause other people to wander off the straight and narrow path with how you dress. That's just basic Catholicism. Pius XII has a great encyclical on this, or a great letter on this to a women's group. Maybe I should put it on my channel someday. But people don't get riled up about this because we live in such an impure age. Impurity is everywhere, to the point where we almost don't notice it anymore. But here's the argument from the German bishops about how this is all just nonsense. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, has once again become the target of a campaign concerning older works containing allegedly erotic texts. Several traditionalist and right-wing Catholic online media outlets have picked up on accusations made by an Argentinian blogger who sensationalized excerpts from 3 publications dating from 2002, 2005, and 2009. And we'll pause there. Do you know how he sensationalized those texts? He quoted them verbatim. That's sensationalizing them. One of those texts described a 16-year-old girl performing, we'll say, impure acts involving our Lord. And I'll leave it at that because I couldn't bring myself to say what she did, let alone want to play the game with YouTube of seeing if they'd let me get away with it. I can't even bring myself to verbalize what is reported in those books. Can't. All he had to do was put the text in there for people to see. That's not sensationalizing. That's just showing you what the now prefect for the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith wrote. Amazing. This is the next best thing to gaslighting going on by the German bishops. Last year, the Cardinal was already under fire for his book, The Mystical Passion, on matters of the flesh and spirituality. Even before he assumed his position as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a publication about kissing was also criticized. That's one way to describe his book, Heal Me with Your Mouth. The passages cited refer to 3 works: the self-help book, Why Can't I Get Well?, the theological work, Incarnate Spiritual Theology, Spiritual Depth and Action, and the spiritual guide, Free Yourself from Anxiety and Impatience. The first book includes passages dealing with physical attraction and a poem about kissing. The second describes a meditation on body awareness, which one is meant to become conscious of one's body parts. During this exploration of body parts, the private areas are mentioned without further discussion. The third mentions the climactic part of the marital act as an example in a single sentence without elaborating on the example. There's also a lot left out there, by the way. The criticism is once again linked to the blessing Fiducia Supplicans issued by Fernandez. This blessing was published shortly before the emergence of the Mystical Passion, the work that became known as the Climactic Book. Fernandez wrote the approximately 100-page book in 1998 during his time as a priest in Argentina. In it, he establishes a connection between the climactic part of the act in spirituality and describes the mystical physical experiences of some saints. In the course of the discussion, he admitted that it is an unpleasant book by today's standards. He himself realized this a few months after its publication and ordered the book to be withdrawn, as he felt it was not having the desired effect. Pope Francis was informed about the book before Fernandez's appointment as prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. And that is a great admission, that last sentence, that Pope Francis allowed him to become prefect for the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, despite knowing full well that these impure, nasty books existed. It has been asked repeatedly, how did he let him become that? Did he not know? Of course he knew. And now this question is being asked of Leo, by the way. Does Leo know? Of course he knows. And that is why early January, there's a consistory happening in Rome. What had been before Francis, and Francis was rightly criticized for this, for not having meetings with the cardinals very often, only when he absolutely had to. This is going to be a more run-of-the-mill meeting. We think of consistories as times when new cardinals are appointed. No announcement on that has been made, although there's time for that to be announced, I guess. But it will be a meeting with the cardinals, and that will be prior to announcements made about who is going to be filling what posts in Rome. And of course, the first one everyone is thinking of is Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. Will he be allowed to finish out his term of service in the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, which would end in 2028 if he is allowed to? And if so, if he is allowed to finish that up, then in 2028 will the Pope appoint him for another 5 or 8 year term, whatever it is? I don't think either of those things is out of the realm of possibility. What are people hoping for is that, of course, he'll be replaced before the end of the year. We shall see. Fernandez did announce that there are 2 more documents that were started under Francis that are going to be published and published soon. If he's going to be gotten rid of from his post, it'll be after that event happens, after that timetable has happened. But that's Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, ladies and gentlemen, being defended by the German bishops because, of course, because they are obsessed with matters of the flesh. They are obsessed with it. They want to change the church's teaching on those things James Martin is interested in. They want to change the church's teaching on contraception, on other impure acts. They want to give communion to the divorced and civilly remarried. They want to allow James Martin type pairings in the church, and on and on and on it goes. So of course they're defending Fernandez. He's their biggest ally in the Vatican. But I'm curious what you think of this in the comments. So let me know. The German bishops are a special case, so we shouldn't be surprised by this. After all, their own reporting on this is pretty hysterical on the entire issue. It's another piece that they published here, just to give you an idea of how deep they go. The headline is, this is from January of 2024 on the Climactic book. They linked this to the article to really use in context. Their headline for it is "No Scandal After All." Cardinal Fernandez is a book on climactic parts of the act, where they say it's not a scandal. Basically, they talk about here a scandal brewing because of misinterpretation of his book. The whole point of it being to cause scandal. Here's what they say. The point of causing scandal was, quote, likely the plan of Fernandez's critics, because the timing of the reference to a seemingly compromising document by the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was deliberate. For almost a month, a heated conflict had been raging in the Catholic Church over the blessing of James Martin-type pairings and remarried couples, after the office of the Argentine cardinal published a declaration permitting such blessings under certain conditions. In other words, there was a nefarious purpose to all of this, and that nefarious purpose was to manipulate policy of the Vatican. And I brought this up in conversation with Joe McLean the other day on his radio show. Was this release timed to influence Pope Leo? And I asked that question because, as I just told you, Pope Leo is going to be making personnel decisions very soon. This timing is curious, and it may be very good if Pope Leo does the rational thing, which is to send Cardinal Fernandez back to Argentina or give him a less important role in the Roman Curia if he decides he wants to keep him within arm's reach. Maybe put him on his advisory council and then make him like an archivist in the Vatican library or something. Beyond that, get him away from anything important. Of course, I think he should go become the Cardinal Archbishop of Ketchikan, Alaska, but that's just me. Go let him say mass to the polar bears. But I am very curious what you think of this, so let me know in the comments. Is Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, the defense you saw there from the German bishops, exactly what you would expect? Are we in the wrong here for criticizing all of this? Oh, we're making a big deal out of nothing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Share this on social media. It helps a great deal too. And remember to pray for the people we criticized today. I'm not trying to make you angry at them. Pray for them. Their soul and yours are both on the line. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.